Everything is number. A phrase attributed to Pythagoras, which today could just as easily be attributed to an economist, who in their daily work tends to do the same. Summing up the macroeconomic situation of an entire country in one single number is called gross domestic product, and you can find it on the pages of every financial and non-financial newspaper. I could also quote another famous saying, "Not everything that counts can be counted." In fact, these days economists are starting to realize that GDP alone isn't exactly a perfect indicator of how the economy is doing. However, today we're interested in looking at how to calculate GDP. And that's already a good starting point. For this purpose, let's look at an economy we can imagine. It's a very bucolic setting where a farmer, Company A, and a miller, Company B, interact. The farmer grows wheat to sell to the miller, and the miller buys the wheat from the farmer to sell it on the final market. The economic accounts we can imagine, in a very simplified form, are the ones you see in the presentation. The farmer, Company A, buys raw materials for 100 and pays a wage to his hypothetical apprentice. Then he will sell the finished product. Part of it, of course, to the miller, who needs the wheat to make flour, and part of it on the final market. The difference between costs and revenues is the farmer's profit, meaning how much he was able to earn from his activity. In the second income statement, for the miller, we see the same cost structure, the purchase of wheat from the farmer, and also the payment to a hypothetical apprentice. On the other side, in the revenue section, we see the sale of flour on the final market. The miller too, Company B, has its own profit. At this point, we can calculate the GDP of our bucolic economy in 3 different ways. The first method is defined as the sum of the value of what has been produced in the economy. This is the most classic definition of GDP, the one you find in every first-year economics textbook when you start studying economics. In this case, we simply need to calculate the difference between the price at which it was sold the final wheat on the market and the price at which the wheat was bought at the start of processing. The difference between these figures, which are shown in red on the chart, gives us the amount of our GDP, which in this case is 80. In the second method for calculating GDP, we look at the added value. That is, compared to the costs incurred, how much value has been added in order to sell on the final market at a higher price than the cost. The added value from the farmer and the added value from the miller are added together to get the gross domestic product of the entire economy. And in this case, we get 80, the same figure as before. It's not a coincidence. It has to come out to exactly the same number. The third method is the most useful for really understanding what GDP is, at least in my opinion. It's the sum of the incomes of those who contributed to production in this economy. And we have 4 people who contributed to production: the farmer, his helper, the miller, and his helper. If we add up the earnings these people received, that is, the wages of the 2 helpers and the profits of the 2 entrepreneurs, the farmer and the miller, we get, not by chance, once again 80. And once again, that's the gross domestic product. This measure helps us understand why we feel so down when the gross domestic product drops in a country. If we refer only to the first definition, we might imagine a country where a bit less wheat is produced. It doesn't seem particularly serious, but if we think about the third of these definitions, then we realize that in this case, if GDP goes down, someone among us has earned less income, and so we're all a bit poorer. The world, the entire planet, is an economy that's much more complex than the one we've just seen between a farmer and a miller, and obviously, it produces an extremely high GDP. We have a figure that's actually the global GDP based on the 2025 data, those estimated in April. This amount is $100 trillion, so if we added up all the incomes of everyone living on planet Earth, for the year 2025, we'd have $100 trillion, obviously not distributed equally among all countries. There are richer and poorer countries, and this list, this ranking of countries, has changed over time. Let's take a look at it. In 1990, the countries of the world were ranked by GDP, according to the ranking we see in the presentation. The richest country in the world is the United States of America, followed by Japan, Germany, France, the United Kingdom, Italy, and Canada. These are 7 countries that represent the largest in the world, the G7, the Group of 7. Over the years, this ranking has stayed pretty much the same among these countries, but there's something new. In 2024, there are 2 countries that weren't on this list of the world's most important before. They are China and India. China, in particular, has grown tremendously. It grew a lot, especially around the year 2000, between 2000 and 2001. We can see this in the next slide, where GDP isn't just shown for 1 year, but for a series of consecutive years. In economics, this is called a time series. Here, there's even a forecast from the International Monetary Fund for GDP up to 2030. We can see that all of Europe together and the United States move in a fairly similar, fairly consistent way up until 2010. In 2010, a deep crisis hit the European Union, starting in Greece with the sovereign debt crisis, which undermined the confidence that international investors had in the European Union. We can see this in the graph. From that point on, the European Union was never really able to recover fully, and GDP grew very, very weakly. The United States continues to grow strongly, but above all, China has proven to be one of the most important countries in recent years. Between 2000 and 2001, when it joined the WTO, the World Trade Organization, it became one of the richest countries in the world, or at least was about to become one. At the very least, nowadays, it has surpassed Europe. And now, to see these numbers in practice, let's head to the lab to figure out on the computer where to download the data, where to look at them, and how to process them. Here we are in the lab to look for data from the International Monetary Fund. We need to search for IMF Data Mapper. When you do this search, the first result is exactly the International Monetary Fund site we're interested in, IMF Data Mapper. Inside, there are several databases available. The top left blue rectangle, titled World Economic Outlook and updated to October 2025, shows 15 economic indicators for 237 countries from 1980 to 2030. There's also a forecasting component. If we click on this blue rectangle, we can see the available data. Scrolling down the page, you can see that for GDP, Gross Domestic Product, there are 7 indicators. We are mostly interested in the second one. There are 2 indicators for inflation, 2 for population, 2 for the balance of payments, and 2 for public finances. Going back to GDP, we're interested in the second indicator, GDP, at current prices in billions of US dollars. Let's click here. And now we're already looking at the world map, with countries shown in different colors depending on their GDP level. The legend is at the top left. We can change this legend, both the colors and the GDP ranges, by clicking on the gear icon at the top right. You go into Setup and you can see that the GDP range can be changed, and the colors can be changed as well. In this case, for simplicity, I'm changing only the colors. Let's use a darker red for the highest GDP, and you can see that the map's layout has already changed. The data we see already loaded is for 2025, but with the 2025 button we can go back, for example, to 1980, the first available data, and we see that the only countries in red are 5, the United States, France, Germany, England, and Japan. These are the G5 countries, to which Italy was added shortly after, and then Canada with the G6 and G7. To go back to 2025, we can hit play, an animation that shows the progression of the years and the economic growth of the various countries. It goes up to 2030, with 5 years of forecasts from the International Monetary Fund. Now, let's go back to 2025. On the right, there's a table showing the numerical GDP values of the various countries. By clicking on the word value, we can sort them from highest to lowest. Clicking again, we'll sort them from lowest to highest. We see that the United States is the richest in the world, with 30,000 billion in GDP. Then comes China, Germany, Japan, India, the United Kingdom, France, Italy, Russia, and Canada. Compared to the 1980s, compared to the G5, there are two big changes, two major newcomers, China, which is now the second richest country in the world, and India, both of which have grown and made remarkable progress in recent years. Scrolling down the page, we have the chart showing the historical series of these GDPs for emerging countries, for advanced economies, and for the whole world. We can make changes by going to add an item to the chart and, for example, try to add something. China, the People's Republic of China, and the United States of America are listed at the bottom under U for United States. Then, if we want to use the data for the European Union as well, we need to go to Group The European Union is not listed as a single country, remove the world, advanced economies, and emerging markets, and select the European Union. The Euro area is a subset that we're not interested in at the moment. By clicking OK, we see the chart just as we presented it during the theoretical part. Scrolling further down the page, you can see that the data from this chart can be downloaded in Excel format, but only for the selected countries, or you can download it in Excel format with all the available data. You can also download an image of the chart to include in your own technical report, but you can actually do even more, which we will see in the upcoming lessons. It will involve connecting our calculation software, R, with the International Monetary Fund database. This way, the two software will be able to communicate directly and keep up-to-date data, which we will see in the next lesson. See you soon.